The president has directed the intelligence community to conduct a full review of what happened during the 2016 election process. And to capture lessons learned from that and to report to a range of stakeholders, to include the Congress.
So that was Lisa Monaco this morning, President Obama's counterterrorism advisor. She announced today that President Obama told the intelligence community he wants a full review of Russian interference in this presidential election before he's out of office. Now, of course, the president-elect keeps insisting, despite the intelligence community saying otherwise, that he's sure Russia did nothing to interfere in the election. But both that announcement about the review and that repeated insistence from the president-elect, those were both before the Washington Post's blockbuster report just out within the last hour tonight, which says that not only did the CIA determine that Russia was interfering in the election, they determined that Russia was interfering in the election specifically to try to hand the presidency to Donald Trump. That's why they were interfering. It was to make Trump president. The Washington Post also reporting some disturbing details tonight about members of Congress being given that assessment by the intelligence community and by U.S. officials ahead of the election, and them not wanting anything said about it as we all went to vote, not knowing this, even though they knew it. Joining us now is Michael McFaul. He's the former U.S. ambassador to Russia. He's now a professor of political science at Stanford. Mr. Ambassador, thanks very much for your time tonight. It's nice to see you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Let me ask you first about this Washington Post report tonight. We had earlier, obviously, seen this public declaration from the Department of Homeland Security and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence saying Russia had meddled in the election. But they didn't say they were trying to elect Donald Trump. I think a lot of us were sort of making that leap. Now we've got the CIA in secret saying, yeah, that's what they were trying to do. They wanted Trump to be president. What do you make of this?
Well, two things I think are especially new for me. And I want to remind you, Rachel, we've been talking about this for months. I wrote a piece about this in the Washington Post, which we talked about in August. But we didn't have the exact data or the CIA connecting the dots. The important piece of this reporting for me is that the CIA now says, you know, in the story, I filtered through the different sources that you rightly pointed out about 10 minutes ago, but that the Russians gave WikiLeaks the data, right? Before we had to speculate about that, the CIA has now briefed these people to say that definitively, and therefore you don't have to be a rocket scientist or have a PhD in Russian studies to say they did that, because WikiLeaks then dropped that data to adversely affect one candidate in this election. So before we had to hypothesize about that, now the CIA is saying it's true.
The CIA also reportedly, or the intelligence community more broadly, I should say, appears to have delivered, according to this reporting, appears to have delivered some of this assessment to members of Congress, to leadership in the House and Senate, and to the heads of the Homeland Security and Intelligence Committees, including in advance of the election, whereupon there was a debate about whether or not the intelligence was good and whether or not the American people should be warned about this. What strikes me in the Washington Post reporting is that they said there was a partisan divide, that the Democrats took this seriously and wanted to put out a statement, wanted to come out and say, we are unified against this. The Republicans didn't. They were at least divided on this issue, and Mitch McConnell was flat out against it. I don't think of intelligence as being that partisan a thing. And I especially don't think of classified intelligence that has to be done in one of those, compartmentalized briefing rooms and all that stuff. I don't think of it as being something that generally engenders a very partisan reaction. Is that part of this reporting a surprise to you, or am I just being naive?
It's not surprising to me, given the election that was at stake. I mean, time and time again, some of us who consider ourselves to be national security experts tried to raise this issue during the campaign, and every time we were derided as, oh, that's just a partisan statement, that's because you're for Hillary Clinton and not Donald Trump. And tragically, even after the election, President-elect Trump has already stated on the record that he doesn't believe this intelligence. So, that is what it was. But moving forward, we have to have a real conversation about national security, not divided between Democrats and Republicans. And that's why there's new legislation. It just dropped a few days ago. It's called Protecting Our Democracy Act. Representatives Cummings and Swalwell have released this. Swalwell, excuse me, have proposed this, an independent bipartisan commission to investigate this. And with all due respect to my friends in the Obama administration, having them do a 30-day review internally within the U.S. government, that's not enough, because that will be dismissed once the new administration comes in. It has to be independent and bipartisan and a serious scrub of this so that we don't go through this again in 2020.
Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia, now professor of political science at Stanford University. Thank you, Professor. It's good to have you here. This is sort of an incredible.
You can see I have a little passion about this, Rachel.
Yeah,
Thanks
me
for
too.
having me on tonight.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for doing the show.
I also want to say that what the ambassador just said there about looking ahead to 2020 and making sure this doesn't happen again. You also heard Lisa Monaco say it in her remarks this morning in terms of having lessons learned about these sort of things. There's also the issue of retaliation, right? I mean, if the United States government interfered in a Russian election to pick the next president of Russia, and Russia found out about it right after that election, don't you think they would retaliate against us somehow? Will there be an American action in response to this, particularly if we know that Russia not only was doing it in order just to be mischievous, they were doing it to get an outcome? Does the fact that they got the outcome they wanted mean that they get away with it? It's hard to believe. Much more ahead here tonight. Stay with us.